we all want to live a good life, right? I mean, that's the goal. But what does that actually mean? And how in the world can someone like an economist whose job is to help build a better society even begin to measure something so personal? Well, it turns out this is one of the deepest, most fascinating puzzles in all of economics. So where do we start? Well, it all goes back to one of the most famous ideas ever, Adam Smith's invisible hand. The theory, and it's a powerful one, is pretty simple. When we all go out and pursue our own self-interest, we're sort of guided as if by this invisible hand to create a good outcome for everyone. But hang on a second. That immediately brings up a huge question, one that's kind of hiding in plain sight. What exactly is this social good? What is this well-being that the invisible hand is supposed to be magically delivering to us? That's the core mystery we're going to dig into. You see, Smith's entire brilliant idea rests on this one massive assumption that getting what we want, satisfying our personal preferences, is what actually makes our lives go better. It sounds totally intuitive, doesn't it? I want a thing, I get the thing, I'm better off. But let's really put that simple idea to the test. This brings us to the first big theory of well-being, which for a long, long time was the default setting for a lot of economic thinking. It's called the preference satisfaction view. The theory itself is beautifully simple. Your well-being is just a measure of how many of your desires or preferences you actually get to satisfy. And you can see the appeal, right? For economists, they can just watch what we choose to buy and do. It's measurable. Plus, it totally respects our freedom. Nobody gets to tell you what should make you happy. It sounds great, it really does. But it hits a major snag with a very simple, very human question. Just think about your own life for a second. Do you always want what's actually good for you? I mean, really? And this is where the theory really starts to wobble. Take some of these powerful counterexamples. You've got the philosopher John Rawls' thought experiment about the grass counter, a guy whose only desire in life is to count blades of grass. If that's all he does, is he really living a life of maximum well-being? Or think about a teenager who refuses cancer treatment to make sure her child is cared for. Her preference is satisfied, sure, but is her own personal well-being going up? And then you get into some really tricky stuff like malevolent tastes, or even desires that have nothing to do with you. If you wish a stranger on the other side of the world gets well, and they do, but you never find out about it, how exactly did your life get better? Okay, so if just getting what we want isn't the whole story, what about simply feeling good? This leads us straight to our second major theory, hedonism. Now, this is an ancient idea, famously linked to thinkers like Jeremy Bentham. And it's incredibly intuitive. The best life is just the one with the most pleasure and the least pain. Simple. It doesn't matter where that pleasure comes from. All that matters is that internal feeling, that happiness meter, is cranked up as high as it can go. But this theory runs headfirst into a classic thought experiment from the philosopher Robert Nozick. Imagine there's a machine, and this machine can give you any experience you could possibly want. You could program a lifetime of pure bliss, writing the great American novel, falling in love, endless joy. The only catch? You're not actually doing any of it. You're just floating in a tank, and the machine is making you think it's real. So here's the question. Would you plug in for the rest of your life? Nozick was pretty sure most of us would say no. And that no is incredibly revealing. It suggests that deep down, we believe there's more to a good life than just the feeling of happiness. We actually want to do things, to be a certain kind of person, not just have the illusion of it. And here's another thought experiment that gets at the same problem. Would you trade a normal, messy, complicated human life for an infinitely long existence as a happy oyster just experiencing a constant low-grade pleasure? Probably not, right? We seem to care about the quality and the source of our happiness, not just the raw amount. So, if well-being isn't just about getting what we want, and it's not just about feeling good, what's left? Well, this brings us to our third contender, the objective checklist theory. The idea here is that some things are just plain good for us, period. Whether we want them or not, and whether they make us feel a buzz of pleasure or not. I mean, the perfect example is health. Being healthy is good for your well-being, even if you've never been sick a day in your life and don't actively feel pleasure from, not having the flu. So what kind of stuff is on this list? Well, the philosopher Martha Nussbaum created a really influential version, and it includes things you'd totally expect, like living a normal lifespan and being healthy, but it also has deeper things, like having social connections, the ability to play and relax, and having some real control over your own life. These are seen as the fundamental building blocks of a good human life.
Now, this approach feels really solid, but it runs into two massive problems. First, who gets to decide what's on the list? Is it me? Is it you? Some committee of philosophers? And second, and this is the really tricky part, how do you weigh the different items? Is more health better than more friendships? This makes it incredibly difficult to use for any kind of real-world decision-making.
And this isn't just some abstract problem. The economist Amartya Sen gives us a powerful, real-world example. A while back, if you just looked at metrics like income, South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa looked pretty similar. But when you dug deeper, wow. The median age at death in India was 37, but it was a shocking 5 in Sub-Saharan Africa. And yet, child undernourishment was actually much worse in South Asia. So if you have limited aid money, where do you send it? Do you prioritize a longer life or better nutrition? The objective list gives you no easy answer. So, at this point, it kind of feels like we've hit a wall, right? All three of the big theories of well-being seem to have these serious, maybe even fatal flaws. So should we just give up? Just say well-being is impossible to figure out? Well, no. There's a very, very clever way out of this whole mess. The solution is the simple but really profound shift in thinking. We stop asking the impossible philosophical question, what is well-being? And instead, we ask a much more practical one. What can we use as good evidence for well-being? This little change is a total game changer. So how does this clever little shift actually get applied in the messy real world, when governments are trying to decide what to do?
In practice, economists often fall back on a tool you've probably heard of, cost-benefit analysis. What this does is it measures our willingness to pay for something, like, say, a new park or cleaner air, and it uses that number as evidence for how strong our preference is. And notice that word, evidence. It's not saying our preference is our well-being, but that it can be a really useful clue.
But, and this is a really, really big but, it's only good evidence under very specific conditions. First, we have to be good judges of how a policy is actually going to affect us. And second, our preference has to be about our own self-interest. For example, if you're willing to pay to protect tigers, that's probably a moral choice, right? It's not really about what makes your personal life go better. In that case, it's a pretty poor indicator of your well-being. And this brings us right back to where we started. Adam Smith's powerful, beautiful idea of the invisible hand, that our self-interest magically creates social good. It only really works if you accept one gigantic hidden assumption, that we are always good judges of what is good for us and that we never ever make mistakes in our choices. We've just spent this whole explainer seeing how complex and fragile that one single assumption really is, which leaves us with a final question to think about. In our own lives, when we're making choices big and small, how often do we truly know what's best for ourselves?